I know the difference between a good foundation and a crumbling one. 31 years in residential contracting, framing houses, pouring slabs, reading blueprints that other men couldn't decipher, teaches you to see what's underneath the surface long before anyone else notices the cracks. I could walk into a house and tell you within 20 minutes whether it would last another generation or collapse on itself by spring. I just never thought to apply that same eye to my own family. My name is Edmund. I'm 64 years old. I built my contracting business from a single pickup truck and the set of tools I bought second-hand from a retiring carpenter in Barrie, Ontario. By the time I was 50, I had 12 full-time employees, contracts with 3 regional developers, and a reputation in Simcoe County that meant something. I'm not telling you this to brag. I'm telling you this because you need to understand what I brought to the table and what certain people at that table decided meant nothing the moment they thought they didn't need me anymore. My wife's name is Rosalind. We met when I was 28 and she was 25 at a church potluck dinner that neither of us particularly wanted to attend. She was funny in those days. Sharp. She had this way of reading a room that I always admired. I thought for a long time that she read me well too. We have one daughter. Her name is Joanna. She's 36 now. We raised her in a 4-bedroom house I built with my own hands outside of Collingwood. White pine framing, radiant floor heating, a wraparound porch I finished the summer before she started high school. She grew up knowing that her father could build something from nothing. I suppose she grew up knowing that she could take it too. Joanna married a man named Stuart 12 years ago. Stuart sells commercial insurance out of an office in Barrett and has never, to my knowledge, owned a pair of work boots. He's the kind of man who shakes your hand too firmly and calls you sir the first time you meet him, and you think, well, that's good manners. It takes a while to understand that it isn't manners at all. It's performance. From the beginning, Stuart had opinions about my business, about how I should be spending my retirement savings, about property he thought I should be investing in. I listened at first the way you listen to a son-in-law. Patiently. Even when his advice didn't land, I figured he meant well. What I didn't see, or didn't let myself see, was how those opinions had a direction. They were always moving money toward him. Toward them. It started small. They needed help with the down payment on a condo in Barrie. $22,000. I transferred it from my business account and told myself it was a loan. There was no paperwork. Rosalind said paperwork would make things awkward. I believed her. Then there was the car. Joanna needed something reliable for the winter, Stuart explained. Their budget was tight. I co-signed on a lease for a Volkswagen SUV. I'm the one who ended up making 4 of the first 6 payments because Stuart had a slow quarter. Then Rosalind started talking about their retirement. Not our retirement, theirs. Joanna and Stuart's. She said it the way you say something you've already decided. She showed me a financial plan Stuart had put together, projecting how much they'd need if I were to help fund their RRSP contributions over the next 3 years. She handed me the printout like it was a bill I'd forgotten to pay. I looked at the number. I looked at my wife. I asked her when exactly she had started working for our son-in-law. She didn't laugh. That was when I understood something had shifted. I was 62 years old in March of last year. I had been slowing down the business gradually, passing day-to-day operations to my site manager, Kellard, who had been with me for 14 years and knew every project better than I did. I wasn't retired, but I was breathing easier. I had plans. Rosalind and I had talked years earlier about spending a summer driving the Trans-Canada, Newfoundland, the Maritimes, cooking on a camp stove, taking our time. By last March, those plans had been replaced, somehow, without discussion, by a different kind of future, one in which I apparently existed mainly to fund other people's lives. Stuart's 40th birthday was on a Saturday in late April. Joanna had been planning it for months. It was not a small affair. They'd booked out the back room of a restaurant near the waterfront in Barrie. 40 guests, open bar. A catered menu that Joanna had emailed me a copy of, as though I might want to review it. The bill, from what I overheard, was somewhere around $8,000. When I asked Joanna once, gently, whether that was a lot to spend on a party, she gave me a look I hadn't seen since she was a teenager, refusing to clean her room. I had not been feeling well that week. It started as tightness. Not dramatic, not the kind of pain you see in films where a man clutches his chest and staggers. It was more like pressure, like someone had placed a sandbag on my sternum and left it there. I'd been getting short of breath on the stairs. I'd been waking at 3 in the morning for no reason, lying in the dark, feeling something I couldn't name. I told Rosalind on the Thursday before the party that something felt off. She was at the kitchen table with her reading glasses on, going over something on her laptop. She looked up and said, "I probably needed to drink more water." On Friday evening, around 9 o'clock, I was in the garage. I keep a small workshop there, mostly for personal projects, and the pressure in my chest became something else. It climbed my jaw. My left arm went strange. I sat down on a stool and knew immediately, with the quiet certainty of a man who has spent his life reading structural warnings, that this was not indigestion. I managed to get inside and call 911. The paramedics were there in 11 minutes. I remember one of them, a young woman with red hair pulled back, who kept talking to me in a calm, steady voice while they worked. I remember thinking she was extraordinarily good at her job. I remember the cold of the gurney and the sound of the garage door still open, and Rosalind standing at the kitchen door in her robe, watching them load me in. She did not come with the ambulance. At the hospital, Royal Victoria Regional in Barrie, the attending cardiologist told me I had experienced what they sometimes call a significant cardiac event, a widowmaker variant, the kind that, with different timing or different luck, does not end with the patient sitting up and asking questions. They moved fast. I was in a procedure room within 40 minutes. Somewhere in the middle of all of that, a nurse told me that the hospital had called my emergency contact. My wife's phone had gone to voicemail. They tried my daughter next. Joanna answered. The nurse told her that her father had been brought in by ambulance, that the situation was serious, and that she should come to the hospital. I found this out later, from the nurse herself, who told me with a careful face that these were the facts. As she knew them, Joanna had said that she was in the middle of something and asked whether it was strictly necessary for her to come tonight. The nurse said that we were recommending it, given the circumstances. Joanna said she would see what she could do. She did not come that night. Rosalind did not come that night. At 11:47, Rosalind called the nurse's station, not my room, the station, and asked if I had been stabilized. The nurse confirmed that I was out of the procedure and in recovery. Rosalind said, and the nurse relayed this to me the next morning with an expression I will never forget. Rosalind said that was a relief, and that she would try to get there in the morning, but the party was tomorrow, and there was a lot to organize. I lay in that hospital bed, hooked to a monitor, my chest still raw from where they'd worked on me, and I listened to the machine measuring my heartbeat. I had built a house with my hands. I had built a business from nothing. I had written checks for a down payment and co-signed car leases, and sat quietly through dinner conversations in which my son-in-law explained my own industry to me. I had deferred and absorbed and told myself that family required patience, and the people I had done all of that for were at a party. Rosalind arrived the next afternoon, around 2. She brought flowers from a grocery store, still in the plastic sleeve. She kissed me on the forehead and said I had given everyone quite a scare. Stuart came with her. He shook my hand too firmly, same as always, and said that the important thing was that I was going to be okay. He said it like he was closing a file. Joanna stood near the door. She said she was so sorry she hadn't come sooner. She had her reasons. The party, the guests, the planning that couldn't just stop. She needed me to understand. Her voice had the texture of someone who expects to be forgiven automatically. Because they always have been. I looked at my daughter standing in the doorway of a hospital room where I had nearly died the night before, and I understood something with perfect clarity. I did not say it. I just looked at her and nodded, the way you nod at a forecast you've already prepared for. The hospital kept me for 4 days. During that time, I had a great deal of quiet. My site manager, Kellard, came on the second day. He sat with me for 3 hours, brought Tim Hortons, and didn't say anything unnecessary. His wife sent a casserole to the hospital that I couldn't eat yet but appreciated more than I can say. My neighbor, a retired school teacher named Bev, called every day. My old friend Marty, who I've known since we were both apprentices in our 20s, drove up from Orangeville on the third day without being asked. These are the people who showed up. The people who were supposed to show up sent a grocery store flower arrangement and asked whether the cardiologist had said anything about long-term activity restrictions. On the fourth day, just before discharge, my cardiologist sat down with me and went through what recovery would look like. No heavy exertion for 8 weeks. Cardiac rehab program at the hospital, twice a week. Medication. A beta blocker, a blood thinner, a statin. He asked me about my home situation, whether I had support. I told him I would be fine. That night, back at home, I sat in the kitchen and did something I hadn't done in years. I went through everything, not emotionally, methodically. The way I used to review a project before breaking ground, checking every line item, making sure what I was about to build could actually stand. I looked at our joint accounts. I looked at my business structure. I looked at the will Rosalind and I had drawn up 8 years ago, which at the time had seemed generous and right, and which now read like a document written by a man who trusted people he shouldn't have. I called my lawyer the next morning. Her name is Constance, and she has handled my business affairs for 16 years. She is precise, thorough, and does not ask unnecessary questions. I told her I needed to see her at her office that week, and I told her why. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "All right, Edmund, let's go through it." Over the following 3 weeks, while I was attending cardiac rehab on Tuesday and Thursday mornings and taking my medication and sleeping 8 hours a night like the cardiologist ordered, I was also building something. The first thing I did was restructure the business. Kellard and I had already been moving in this direction, but I accelerated it. I transferred operational control to him formally with a buy-in agreement that paid me fair market value over 5 years, clean, documented, and entirely mine to execute because I was the sole owner. The second thing I did was contact a financial advisor who was not connected in any way to my household, not someone Rosalind knew, not someone who had ever sat at our dinner table. I moved the majority of my personal assets, my RRSP, my TFSA, a non-registered investment account I'd been building since my late 30s, into accounts that were mine alone. Not joint. Not accessible without my signature. This is entirely legal in Canada. I know because Constance confirmed it 3 times. The third thing I did was retain a family law lawyer, a different firm from Constance, to understand my position clearly. What separation would mean in Ontario. What the matrimonial home was worth. What my exposure was. I needed to know the whole map before I decided which road to take. I was not acting from anger. I want to be clear about that. By the time I started making these moves, the anger had already passed through me and been replaced by something quieter and more useful. I was acting from clarity. While I was doing all of this, life at home continued almost exactly as it had before. Rosalind made dinner. We watched television. She asked about my cardiac rehab appointments with the mild interest of someone asking about a dentist visit. Stuart and Joanna came for dinner one Sunday. Stuart talked about a commercial real estate investment he was looking into and whether I might want to get involved. I asked a few questions and said I'd think about it. I had no intention of thinking about it. On a Tuesday morning in early June, 6 weeks after the night I was taken by ambulance, Rosalind told me at breakfast that she and Joanna were going up to Collingwood for the weekend, a spa weekend at a resort near the ski hills. She mentioned, while pouring coffee, that it was Stuart's idea, a thank you gift to both of them for all the party planning. She said it like it was an item on a list. I said, "Have a good time." She said she would. She did not ask whether I was comfortable being alone for the weekend, 6 weeks out from a cardiac event. She did not ask whether I needed anything. She said goodbye on Friday morning, and she and Joanna drove north. I sat at the kitchen table for a long time after the car backed out of the driveway. Then I got up, got dressed, and went to Constance's office. The separation agreement was ready. We'd gone through it line by line over 4 separate meetings. It was fair. Genuinely fair, not punishingly so, because that was never the point. The matrimonial home would be listed. Assets that were clearly mine remained mine. The restructuring I'd done with the business was clean and legally sound. Rosalind would receive what she was entitled to under Ontario family law, no more and no less. I signed where Constance told me to sign. Then I did one more thing. I co-signed that car lease. I'd made payments on it. I contacted the dealership, and because I was on the contract and current on payments, I exercised my right to end the lease term early with appropriate penalties, which I paid in full that afternoon. The car would be picked up the following week. I went home. I cooked dinner. I watched the hockey game. I slept well. When Rosalind came home Sunday evening, there was a letter on the kitchen table where her coffee cup usually sat. I was not there. I had packed what I needed into my truck on Saturday morning and driven to Marty's place in Orangeville, where he and his wife had a spare room and the kind of friendship that doesn't require explanation. I know she called. I know because Marty told me gently that there had been a number of calls from an unknown number. I didn't listen to the messages for 3 days. When I did, the first 2 were confusion. The third was anger. Real anger. The kind that comes from realizing that a situation has slipped entirely beyond your control. She wanted to know what this was about. She wanted to know how I could do this. She said I wasn't thinking clearly because of everything that had happened with my health. She did not say she was sorry. Joanna called Marty's number. She'd gotten it from somewhere. On the Wednesday, Marty handed me the phone. I listened to my daughter tell me that I was being irrational and cruel, that she knew things had been difficult, but this was not the answer, that Stuart was very concerned. I waited until she finished. Then I said, I needed you at the hospital, Joanna. You didn't come. There was a pause. Dad, the party. I know about the party, I said. I know you were at the party when the hospital called. I'm not interested in the explanation. I've heard it. She started crying. I'm not without feeling. It was hard to hear, but I had spent a week in a hospital bed, being measured and steady, and I had learned something about what I could absorb and what I couldn't. I said, I need you to let me go now. The separation proceedings moved through the system the way these things do in Ontario, slowly and with a great deal of paperwork. Rosalind hired a lawyer. There were negotiations. There were a few conversations that went nowhere. Through all of it, I stayed in Orangeville, went to my cardiac follow-ups, worked a few hours a week doing consulting for a small builder in the area who had heard I was available, and slept the kind of sleep I hadn't slept in years. The matrimonial home sold in August. It was a seller's market, even outside Collingwood, and it sold for more than I'd expected, which meant the division was fair and Rosalind was not left without resources. I want that on the record. I was not trying to damage anyone. I was trying to be done. Stuart, from what Kellogg told me a few months later, because these things travel, especially in a county where everyone knows someone, had made some investments that didn't go the way he'd projected. The commercial real estate he'd been so confident about, the market shifted and he got caught in it. Without my business as a backstop, without the joint account that no longer existed, the picture looked different for them. I did not feel the satisfaction I thought I might. I just felt the absence of the weight. I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Orangeville now. It's on the 2nd floor of a building that is well constructed. I noticed that immediately. Checked the baseboards and the window seals the day I viewed it, old habit. I have a small balcony. I planted tomatoes in containers there this summer, which Marty thought was funny. My cardiologist cleared me for full activity in September. I hiked part of the Bruce Trail in October with Marty and another friend, 2 days light pack. I cooked over the camp stove both nights. I did not drive the Trans-Canada, not yet, but I have a map on the wall, and I have time, which is something I didn't know how to value until the night a paramedic with red hair talked me through the worst 11 minutes of my life, while my phone showed no missed calls from the people who should have been calling. I think about that sometimes, not with bitterness. That would be a waste of whatever years I've got left. I think about it the way I think about structural failure in a building. You learn from it, you understand where the weakness was, and you make sure that the next thing you build is grounded in something real. I know the difference between a load-bearing wall and the facade. I should have applied that knowledge sooner, but I know it now. There's a moment in cardiac rehab they don't warn you about it, where you're on a treadmill with electrodes on your chest and a technician watching a screen, and you realize that the only people in the room who genuinely care whether your heart keeps beating are strangers who are paid to care. And somehow, that's not as sad as it sounds. It was, for me, clarifying. I spent a lot of years believing that the people closest to you are automatically the ones who will show up. I think a lot of us carry that assumption the way we carry a wallet, without examining it, because we assume it's still full. What happened to me the night of April? The ambulance, the procedure room, the phone that rang to voicemail, was the moment I finally opened the wallet and found it empty. What I did afterward wasn't revenge. I want to be honest about that even now. It was accounting. There is a difference. Revenge is emotional. It wants to wound. What I did was look at a set of facts clearly and act accordingly. The facts were these. I had nearly died. The people I had supported for decades could not interrupt the party to come to the hospital. And when they did arrive, they brought grocery store flowers and asked about activity restrictions. I think about Joanna standing in that doorway, my daughter. There was a time I taught her to ride a bike in the driveway of the house I built, and she cried when she scraped her knee, and I held her until she stopped. I carried that version of her for a long time, maybe too long. The version standing in the hospital doorway with a prepared explanation was someone different, someone who had learned, slowly, that there were no real consequences for taking me for granted. That was partly my fault. I had made it easy. The honest thing I've come to understand is that what we allow is what continues. Not because the universe is punishing anyone. I don't believe life works that way. It continues because people are practical. If you absorb every cost without naming it, people will keep adding to the bill. I had been absorbing for years. The co-signed lease, the down payments, the dinner conversations where my own industry was explained back to me. I kept the ledger in my head but never put it on the table. It takes a certain kind of clear thinking to look at your own life without flinching, not intelligence in the academic sense. I never went to university, but the willingness to see what's actually in front of you rather than what you hoped would be there. Kellard has it. Marty has it. I learned it late, but I learned it. And then there's the question of what you do with what you see. That's where character lives, I think. Not in the dramatic gestures, not in the anger. The anger is easy, but in the quiet decision to act from your own integrity rather than your wound. I didn't cut Rosalind out of what she was lawfully owed. I didn't try to destroy Stuart's business, though I knew things about his finances that could have made his life difficult. I just stopped. I stopped subsidizing a version of my life that had nothing to do with who I actually was. I'm 64 years old, and I live in a 2-bedroom apartment in Orangeville with tomato plants on the balcony. I have a map on the wall. I sleep well. That's not nothing. After the night of the ambulance, I understand that's actually quite a lot.